production, which would provide jobs, and two, a clean environment seem to come in conflict. But let me tell you what the answer is. We can have both, and we shall have both. And the way we can have both is to develop the great resources of this country in a way that they will not pollute the atmosphere, that they will contribute to a clean environment. And that is why we are going forward in terms of our huge government programs in research and development for the purpose of seeing that our coal resources can be developed into a clean fuel. That is why we are going forward in our programs for the development of solar energy and nuclear power, which of course would be clean fuel. And I can assure all of you here that your federal government, working with the states, working with private enterprise, can and will achieve the goal of not only a better and cleaner environment in terms of our water and our air, but also the jobs, the opportunity for all Americans that is so important for us to enjoy an environment.
This morning at 11 o'clock, I tried to explain to you why I was not an environmentalist, but rather was an ecologist. And I tried to give you some idea, at least from my point of view, what ecology meant as distinguished from environmentalism. And the point that I tried to make most fundamentally is that where environmentalism tries to patch things up, where environmentalism applies band-aids, cosmetics, and everything that you can think of to the environment, where it sort of takes hold of nature, strokes it, as Nixon would say, and says, produce. We'll exploit you, we'll ride you, we'll squeeze you, we'll twist you, we'll turn you, but just don't poison us. Okay? Where it tries to turn, use soil, pour chemicals in, but if only they weren't poisonous, everything would be great. And if you've seen one redwood tree, you've seen them all, sort of thing. Where it believes in good management and good husbandry, ecology believes in a genuine harmonization of humanity with nature. And that harmonization of humanity with nature depends fundamentally upon the harmonization of human beings with each other. The attitude that we have had toward nature has always depended upon the attitude we have had toward each other. Let's not kid ourselves. There is no such thing as a pure nature. It's going to take a long time for us to purify ourselves before we can look at nature and say, this is what nature is. Let me give you a few examples, if I may. To the American Indians, nature and animals lived in clans and in tribes. The word beaver lodge comes from the Iroquois conception that beavers lived in lodges and that they had a perfectly democratic society, just as many of the Iroquois tribes had. And then afterward, if you go on, still further into the ancient world, they believed that there was slavery in nature and that people were born to be slaves and that the Greeks, say in particular, were born to own slaves, And all of this is regarded as an attribute of nature. If you go on to the Middle Ages, and you have the feudal economy with the manor, the baron on the top and his castle, drafty and windy, but still with his mighty sword looking very much like Richard Burton. At that particular point, with the serf down at the bottom, you had another idea of nature, just like you had another idea of heaven. And the idea of nature that existed around the Middle Ages was that the lion was the king of the beasts and you had lowly ants. And you were the lowly ants and I was the king of the beasts, you see. That was it. And everybody was in a hierarchy. There were serfs and there were all kinds of vassals and so on and so on and so forth. And heaven was made up the same way. Jesus or God sat on a throne and he had his archangels beside him and you had the whole feudal system. When you go on into a market economy like the good old 19th century free enterprise model individualism, everybody make it on their own, dog eat dog, survival of the fittest, nature was also seen exactly the same way. The Darwinian conception of nature exactly fits the free market economy. There too, everybody was prey and predator. The people who survived, like Morgan Rockefeller, all the people around the Chase Manhattan Bank were obviously fit to survive, and if you died, that was your trouble and problem. Do you know that in the Irish potato famine of the 1840s, they refused to feed the Irish people? They said that this was a natural catastrophe, and that following some conception, Malthusian or otherwise, Darwin wasn't around as yet, they were not fit to survive. And this is the law of nature, they said. Today we got our own law of nature, and that's what I want to talk to you about because it deeply concerns me. The simple fact is right now that I'm not only not an environmentalist, I got some hot news. I'm not a futurist. I'm not a futurist at all. Herman Kahn is a futurist. And Herman Kahn and I have nothing in common except a reasonable amount of the same weight. I mean in terms of fact. We have absolutely nothing in common. I do not look forward to the year 2000 that he has in mind, or 2001 or 3000. And it's about these questions that I would like to talk about, if I may, given only an hour, and I would even like to get some discussion and if time permits, because I'm sick and tired of this authoritarian lecture where I talk to you and then you go off to somebody else who talks to you and then you go off to somebody else who talks to you. So we will try to have some type of questions or discussion or comments or criticism. You can take the microphone after that. But I'm not a futurist any more than I'm an environmentalist. I'm a utopian. I want to see this word revived. I want to see us use it. I want to see us think utopia, not think futurism. What is futurism? Futurism is the future as it exists today, projected 100 years from now. That's what futurism is. If you have a population of X billions of people, how are you going to have food? How are you going to do this? Nothing has changed. All they do is make everything either bigger or they change the size. You'll live in 30-story buildings, you'll live in 60-story buildings. Frank Lloyd Wright was going to build an office building that was 1 mile high. That was futurism. Solari walks around today, and I know a lot of people here think highly of him, and I don't want to be ad hominem about these things. The man, I believe, is very well intentioned. He's a futurist. I'm not. I do not want to see people living in cities if I have anything to do about it. And certainly I don't want to live in cities that are going to be 3 miles high. It doesn't make any sense. I don't like Corbusier. I don't like what he did to Brasilia or how he affected Brasilia. I don't like high-rise apartments, even if I'm stuck in one right now when I live in the New York area. Rent, I can't afford otherwise. The simple fact is I just don't believe that we have to extend, in the name of futurism and in the idea of idealism, the present into the future. We have to change the present so that the future looks very, very different from what it is today. This is a terribly important notion to convey. So a lot of people are walking around today who sound very idealistic. And what do they want to do? They want multinational corporations to become multi-cosmic corporations. Literally. They want to bring them up in space. They want to colonize the moon. They can't wait to go to Jupiter, much less Mars. They're all very busy and they're coming around and they even have long hair and they even have beards. And they come around and they say, oh, I can't wait to get into my first space shuttle. That is the future. I can't wait, as clocks change from ordinary mechanical ones to electronic ones, to get the latest super-duper type of clock and chronometer that will give me every detail of what the time is in Paris, as though I don't know what the time is in Paris, so I give a damn right now. They want to go ahead and they want to have supersonic aircraft, and they want to have space platforms, and they want to give you solar energy, 24 square mile platform way up into space. Dig this story, mind you, with microwaves beaming down to the earth, and this is regarded as ecology, and it's not ecology. It's futurism. It's what Exxon wants to do. It's what Chase Manhattan wants to do. It's what all the corporations want to do. It's multinational. It may be anything else you want, but it is not futurism. It's not utopia. It is pure futurism. It is the present extended into the future. A mass society, and how will we keep in touch with each other? We don't even have to look at each other. We'll look at television screens. I'll press a button. I'll see you on the television screen. You'll be at Mars, for all I know, and we'll have a wonderful conversation with each other, and we'll say, gee whiz, we've got an alternate technology or an appropriate for what, I don't know. We've got a soft technology. I don't know how soft it is or hard it is. The point is, it isn't a liberatory technology. I may know people in the future for years and years, play chess games with them, have interesting intellectual conversations with them, and never touch them once. If that is what the future is going to look like, I'm glad I'm 57 years old and don't have that much to go. I don't want it. I am very serious. Now I'd like to touch a few nerves. I don't believe, and I say this with great respect for my dear, almost friend in a sense, however much we have not had that much personal contact, I don't believe that the Earth is a spaceship. I'm asking you to think what it means to think of the Earth as a spaceship. It does not have valves. It does not have all kinds of radar equipment to guide it. It is not moved by rockets. It has not got any plumbing. We may have plumbing, but it is not a spaceship. It's an organic, living thing to a very great extent, at least on its surface, built of inorganic material. It is in the process of growth and it is in the process of development. It is not a spaceship. We're beginning to develop a language which has nothing whatever in common with ecology. It has a lot to do with electronics. We talk of input. Give me your input. Plug in. Well, I don't plug in. I discuss. Machines plug in. Machines plug in. Radar is the language that produced it, and the military is the language that produced the word plug in. Give me your input, give me your output. That is not what I want. I don't want your output, I want you. I want to hear your words. I want to hear your language. I'm not engaged in feedback with you. I'm engaged in a dialogue, a discussion. It isn't your feedback I want your opinion. I want to know what you think. I don't want to have a circuit plugged into me where I can get your feedback and you can get my input. Please, I'm making a plea here, and if you think I'm talking about language, I think you would be wrong here. I'm not talking about language. I'm talking about sensibility. A plant does not have input or output. It does something for which electronics has absolutely no language. It grows. It grows. And let me tell you another thing. It not only grows, it does more than change. It develops. We have a big problem with all these words which reflect a way in which we think. And that's what bothers me. A way in which we think. It's the futuristic language of spacecraft, of NASA, of electronics, and I'm going to tell you of the Pentagon with its own war games, with its game theory on if then what. What would you do if the Eskimos invaded Siberia and the Chinese retreated to North Africa? What would your position be if you had to move the American Marines into Peking? If and what? This is a sensibility that deeply concerns us. It is the sensibility of futurism. It is the language of futurism in which people themselves are molecularized and then atomized and then finally reduced to subatomic particles. And what we really have in the way of an ecosystem is not growth and not development. What we have is plumbing. We run kilocalories through the ecosystem, and we turn on valves here, and we turn off valves there. Now this may be useful. I don't deny that. We should know how energy moves through an ecosystem. But that alone is not an ecosystem. We're beginning to learn that plants have a life of their own and interact with each other. That there are subtle mechanisms which we cannot really understand. They can't be reduced to energy. They can't be reduced to kilocalories. We have to view them from a different point of view. We have to view them as life, as distinguished from the non-living, and even that distinction is not so sharp and clear as many people think. So this is the language of futurism and the language of electronics, which reflects a very distinct sensibility that bothers me very, very much. It is not utopian, and I'll get to that after. It is the language of manipulation. It is the language of mass society.
Most futurists start out with the idea that you got a shopping mall, what do you do then? Well, the first question to be asked is, why the hell do you have a shopping mall? That is the real question that has to be asked. Not what if you have a shopping mall, then what do you do? How do you organize traffic? If the real question is not even so much traffic, but what kind of cars are you using? What do they mean to your life? For millions of people, as in Los Angeles, to relate to each other through signals. You know, you're turning left or you're turning right, or you put on your brights or you cut off your brights. And do you realize how many millions of people relate to each other that way? Literally relate to each other that way in a highly mobile society. Then we got mobility, the cosmic mobility. Not only input and output and feedback and space, but the idea that we are one with the cosmos. And we are one with the cosmos. We come out of the cosmos, but we're also different from the cosmos. Out there in that great vast distance, which people feel we should colonize, moving out into spacecraft, or somehow relate to the distant universe and listen to the stars, we haven't even begun to listen to our own feelings. We haven't even begun to listen to our own locality. This planet is going down in ruin, and people are talking about means of projecting space platforms out there, talking of a global village when we don't have villages anywhere on this planet to begin with. We don't have them. We don't have any villages, we don't have any communities. We live in a state of atomization, and we expect to electronically communicate with each other through global villages. I'm trying not to name names, but I think many of you know who I'm talking about. I think many of you know who I'm talking about. This bothers me because it may be good physics, it may be good mechanics, it may be good dynamics. It may be good anything you wish, but it is not ecology. It is not ecology. The most fundamental mistake begins with the idea that things change. Now, you know, to change may mean something or it may be nothing. If I step away here and walk 3 feet away, I have undergone change. I moved 3 feet away. But I haven't done a damn thing so far as I am concerned, or so far as you are concerned. It is not change that I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is development, growth. I don't mean growth in the business sense. I mean growth of human potentialities. I mean growth of human spirit. I mean growth of human contact. That is ecological. To develop is what is really ecological. To change can mean anything. It can be moving from Boston to New York because you're looking for changes. And when you hear the statement, man, have I undergone changes? I don't know what changes anyone has undergone. The question is, what is the end toward which you want to develop? What is the goal that you're trying to realize? And then afterwards, whether or not you have developed to that goal. So mere input and output and feedback, mere motion means nothing. The real problem is discussion and dialogue, recognition of personality, growth and development, which is what biology is concerned with. It is not concerned merely with change. Lastly, it must be made very clear that if you believe that the Earth is a spaceship, then you believe that the world is a wash. You and Sir Isaac Newton agree perfectly. The world is a clock. Just as a spaceship is a lot of plumbing with a lot of rockets, with a lot of dials, with a lot of pilots, and all the rest of that stuff. And if you believe in addition that the beauty today of change is that you can move all over the place in a helicopter which will pick up your geodesic dome, or use some type of electronic communications to relate to somebody who's 3,000 miles away whom you may never see, then we are not changing in the developmental sense anything at all. We're making things worse and worse all the time. And that is a matter also of very great concern. Ecology must begin, social ecology must begin with a love of place. There must be home. Oikos, home, ecology, the study of the household. If we do not have a household, and that household is not an organic, rich community, if we do not know the land we live on, if we do not understand its soil, if we do not understand the people we live with, if we cannot relate to them, then at that particular point, we are really in a spaceship. We are really out in a void. Ecology must begin with a very deep understanding of the interaction between people and the interaction between people and not the world of life. It's so grand and cosmic to talk about the biosphere. I'm interested in the immediate ecosystem in which you live, where you come from, what you love, what is the land that you love. I don't mean the country or the state. I'm talking about the land that you may occupy. It may even be a village, it may be a city, it may be a farmstead. But first and foremost, without those roots that place you in nature and in a specific form of nature, it is a deception to talk about cosmic oneness. It is a deception to talk about spaceships. It is a deception even to talk about ecosystems without having this sense of unity with your immediate locale, with your soil, with your community, with your home. Then you can go out and visit. Visit. Travel through space if one day you want to travel through space and it's available. Fly across or walk across or bicycle across. Whatever you want in the way of territory. But first and foremost, without that community and without that sense of home, without that sense of the organic and the developmental, rather than the mere inorganic and change, in which you merely change place, you are changing nothing. The problems are merely amplified or diminished, but they remain the same problems. And it is for this reason that futurism today plays an increasingly very, very reactionary role. Because it works with the prejudice that what you have is given. You have to assume what exists today, and you extrapolate into the future, and you play a numbers game. And then you go around and you logistically manipulate here and there. And implicit in all of this is the idea that you are things to be manipulated. That there are all kinds of game-playing technicians who are going to decide through their knowledge of electronics, through their know-how, through their feedback and their input, where you go, what you should do, and this is becoming a very serious problem today, particularly when it is mistaken for ecology based on the organic, on the growing, on the development as an individual, as a community, and as a place. You then finally reach the most sinister numbers game of all. Who should live and who should die? The population game. The terrifying lifeboat ethics, in which now, in the name of ecology today, views are being proposed that are almost indistinguishable, if you get away from the rhetoric, from German fascism. There are those who are made to drown. They happen to live in India. Conveniently, they happen to have black or dark skins, and you can identify them, those who understand. And then there are those who occupy another lifeboat. That lifeboat is called North America. And in that lifeboat, you have to conserve what you have. See? You have to be prepared to develop an ethic. You have to be prepared to develop the stamina to see people die. Of course, you regret it. But scarce resources and growing population, what can you do? You're out there in the ocean, the ship is sinking. So instead of trying to find out what was wrong with the ship that makes it sink, or instead of trying to build a ship that will make it possible for all of us to share the world, you get into a lifeboat, just like you get into a spaceship. And at that particular point, the world will be damned. And that is a very sinister ideology. I speak as one who comes from the 30s and remembered very dramatically that there was the demographic ecology, if you like, in Germany, no different from some of the demographic ecology I have been witnessing today. And I realize and sense very deeply I am touching sore spots and views. But if I did not speak out, and you will be free, please, to speak out in a short while, remember well that the implications of some of these conceptions are extremely totalitarian, extremely unecological, extremely inorganic, and tend, if anything, to promote a totalitarian vision of the future in which there is no human scale, in which there is no human control. Another thing that troubles me very deeply is the enormous extent to which social ecology or ecological problems are reduced simply to technological problems. That is ridiculous. It's absurd. The factory is a place where people are controlled, whether they build solar collectors or not. It makes no difference. The same relationships will exist there as will exist under any other circumstances where domination exists. If household means that women take care of the dishes and men go out and do the manly work, such as make war and clean up the planet and reduce the population, where have we gone? Nothing has changed. What will a spaceship in Earth look like? What will it be? Who will be the general to give the orders? Who will be the navigator to decide which way the spaceship goes? Please bear in mind what the implications of these things are. If people live in cities that are 1 mile high, how the hell can you get to know each other? How can you have a feeling for the land in which you live when the landscape that you see goes up to a horizon 20, 30, and 40 miles away? On top of the World Trade Center, I have no feeling for New York. If I were just an ordinary, simple product of the United States Air Force and I were ordered from the World Trade Center way up there to bomb Manhattan, looking down upon it, I would see nothing. I would press the button and it would be meaningless. Up would go the great bomb, the great flash, the great cloud. It wouldn't have any meaning to me. Down on the ground, when I look up at the Empire State Building or when I look up at the World Trade Center, I feel oppressed. I feel that I have been reduced to a lowly ant. I begin to feel the demand for an environment that I can control, that I can begin to understand. When I see plants growing around me, when I see life existing around me, human life, animal life of all its different forms, flora, then I can relate, this is my land. When Pete Seeger screams out, not Pete Seeger, excuse me, Guthrie sang out, this is my land, it meant land. It did not mean a skyscraper 1 mile high that towered over all of humanity, that was completely centralized, that was completely subject to manipulation and completely subject to control. What we have to do is not only think small, we have to think human. Small is not enough. What is human is what counts, not just what is small. What is beautiful are people. What is beautiful is the ecosystems and their integrity in which we live. What is beautiful is the soil that we share with the rest of the world of life, and particularly that special bit of soil in which we feel we have some degree of stewardship. It is not only what is small that is beautiful, it is what is ecological that is beautiful, what is human that is beautiful. What is important is not only whether a technology is soft or what it is between, otherwise known as intermediate, or whether or not, whatever it may be appropriate to. As I have said before, the Atomic Energy Commission is absolutely convinced that nuclear power plants are appropriate technology to the Atomic Energy Commission. The B-1 bomber is a very appropriate technology to the Air Force. What I am concerned with is, again, what is liberatory, what is ecological. We have to bring these value-charged words, and we have to bring these value-charged concepts into our thinking, or else we will become mere physicists dealing with dead matter and dealing with people as though they are mere objects to be manipulated in spaceships or to be connected through various forms of electronic devices or subject to world games, or finally set adrift on a raft or a lifeboat in which they kick off anybody else who threatens to eat their Unita biscuits or threatens to drink their distilled water. And that becomes eco-fascism. That becomes eco-fascism. And it horrifies me to think that anything ecological, even that word eco, could be attached to fascism. First and foremost, we must go back to the utopian tradition in the richest sense of the word. Not to the electronic tradition, not to the tradition of NASA, not to the tradition of Sir Isaac Newton, in which the whole world was a machine or a watch. Not to the idea that the faster you go, the better it is. The more you move, the richer you get. You can travel all over the country and learn nothing because you're carrying something that's very important with you that will either decide whether you learn or not, and that is yourself. Move to California tomorrow, and if you've still got the same psychological and spiritual and intellectual problems, you'll be sweating it out in San Francisco no differently than you do in Amherst or no differently than you do in New York. That is the important thing. To recover yourself, to begin to create a community, and what kind of community? Imagination can begin to create. Imagination to power, as the French students say. Be practical, do the impossible. Because if you don't do the impossible, as I've cried out over and over again, we're going to wind up with the unthinkable. And that will be the destruction of the planet itself. So to do the impossible is the most rational and practical thing we can do. And that impossible is, both in our own conviction and in our shared conviction with our brothers and sisters, to begin to try to create or work toward a very distinct notion of what constitutes a finally, truly liberated as well as ecological society. A utopian notion, not a futuristic notion. It finally means this, that we have to begin to develop ecological communities, not just an ecological society. It's very easy for me to palm that off. Ecological communities made up of comparatively small numbers of groups in beautiful communities spaced apart from each other so that you could almost walk to them, not merely have to get into a car and travel 60 or 70 miles to reach them. It means that we have to reopen the land and reuse it again to create organic, French-intensive garden beds and learn how to develop a new agriculture in which we will all participate in, indeed a horticulture. We have to look for communities that we can take into a single view, as Aristotle said more than 2,200 years ago, and we have yet to learn a great deal from the Greeks, despite all their shortcomings as slave owners and as patriarchs. A community that we can take into a single view so that we can know each other. And a community in which we know each other not by virtue of sitting around and talking over the telephone or listening to some honcho talk over a microphone or listening to some bigger honcho talk over a television screen. It has to be done by sitting around in communities, in those town meetings, and in those structures, which we have here in the United States as part of the legacy, at least the best legacy of the United States, and start thinking utopian in the fullest sense of the word. We have also to develop our own technologies. We can't let other people simply build them for us. They can't be transported from God knows where to us. We have to know how to fix our faucets and create our own collectors. We have to become richly diversified human beings. We have to be capable of doing many different things. We have to be farmer citizens and citizen farmers. We have to recover the ideal that even a Ben Franklin, who by no means can be regarded, in my opinion anyway, as anything slightly more than a Philistine, believed in the 18th century. You could both print and read, and when you printed, you read what you printed. That's what we have to bring to ourselves. We have to think not in terms merely of change, we have to think in terms of growth. We have to use the language of ecology so that we can touch each other with the magic of words and communicate with each other with the magic and the richness of concepts, not of catchphrases that are really snappy. Input, output. Dialogue is longer, but it has a beautiful ring to it. Dialogos, speech between two, talking between two, logos, logic, reasoning out creatively, dialectically, and growing through conversation and growing through communication. This is what I mean by utopia, to put it almost minimally, since I'm afforded only an hour to talk to you and I can spend 6 months carrying on an ongoing dialogue almost every day. We have to go back to Fourier, who said that the measure of a society's oppression can be determined by the way it treats its women. It was not Marx who said that. It was Charles Fourier. We have to read Fourier, we have to read Robert Owen, who created the idea of the decentralized so-called industrial village, non-hierarchical in its nature. We have to go back to the rich tradition of the New England town meeting and all that was healthy in it, and recover that and learn a new type of confederalism. And we have to go back not to leaders and led, but to teachers and students. We have to get away from the notion that there are those who are fit to lead and you're incompetent, and those who can only be led, and that's about it. Today, the real movements of the future, insofar as they are utopian in their output, insofar as they are trying to create not an extension of the present, but trying to create something that is truly new, that alone can rescue life, human spirit, as well as the ecology of this planet, must be built around a new rich communication, not between leader and led, between student and teacher, so that every student can eventually become a teacher and not a dictator, a governor, a controller, and a manipulator. It is out of that type of communication, out of that type of organic society, with that richness of language where in fact we can finally reach the point of poetry in communication with each other, which we must strive for. Not electronics, poetry. Not something artificial, but real music. The music of communication and the poetry of communication has to be recovered. And above all, we have to think organically. We have to think organically, not electronically. We have to think in terms of life and biology, not in terms of watches and physics. We have to think in terms of what is human, not what is merely small or big, because that alone will be beautiful. Any society that seeks to create utopia will not only be a society that is free, it also has to be a society that is beautiful. There can no longer be any separation, any more than between mind and body can there be a separation between art and the development of a free society. We must become artists now, not only ecologists. Utopians, not futurists. Ecologists, not environmentalists. Thank you.